Hello, my name is Shalshelet, and let's study some Torah together from this week's Parsha, Tzav. I want to talk about a very rare trope that appears in this week's Parsha, and I want to tie it into the idea of separation of powers. And I will eventually connect it to this person. And I'm not going to tell you who it is, so it will be the mystery person. Hopefully you'll listen to the video, watch the video, and you'll understand why I showed a picture of him. So the rare trope that I'm talking about is the Shalshelet. It's a squiggly line that's above the word. And in this week's Parsha, the word is Vayishchat, and it sounds as follows. Vayishchat. Wow, what a great trope. This up and down sound is very fancy. It's definitely the most fanciest trope of all. And as I said, it's only 4 times. And it appears in a word that's actually a very common word in the Torah, Vayishchat, and he slaughtered. It's talking about Moshe slaughtering the ram. What's the context? We're talking about the consecration of the Mishkan, of the tent of meeting. Up until now, we had commandments about what should be done there. And finally, they are now dedicating the Mishkan for 7 days. And during those 7 days, and anointing the Kohanim, Aharon and his sons. But during those 7 days, Moshe is doing all the work. He's doing the sacrifices, the sprinkling of blood, and anointing with oil. Which makes sense. When you start a new job, you're an intern, or you go into training for a while, you learn from the big boss, and then you take it on yourself. So that's what's happening here. The Kohanim are just watching, and Moshe is doing everything. And when he sacrifices the second ram, that's when we have the Shalshelet. And the question is why? Why would the Masoretes put such an elaborate trope on this word? So let's start with Pshat, what's called the simple, or some people call it the most authentic explanation. And I saw an interesting explanation by a rabbi who wrote a book on the tropes, and he says it has nothing to do with the content of the word. So don't look for what the meaning of the word is. It's simply the syntax of the sentence. That demands that there should be such a trope there. And if you look at the Hebrew, this is the first half of the pasuk. So there's Vayishchat, that's subsection 1, and then Vayikach Moshe midamo, subsection 2, Vayiten al tznuch ozen Aaron ha'ymanit. So because there's 3 subsections, and the first subsection is only 1 word, he claims that that explains why there's a Shalshelet. The problem with that explanation is that there are plenty of other psukim in the Torah that have long first halves that can be divided into 3 parts, that the first part is 1 word, yet they don't have a Shalshelet. They have all these other tropes that are less elaborate. So that makes me think that what we call drash is actually the maybe better explanation and more persuasive. And what do I mean by drash? Let's see if we can find a common thread between those 4 words where this trope appears and the content of what's happening in those verses. So, the first time that this Shalshelet, this trope appears, is with Avraham and Lot. Lot is being told that he needs to evacuate Sodom because God is going to destroy the city because they are evil. And God sends 2 angels to take him out of the city to warn him. But instead of doing the logical thing of just leaving the city, taking his loved ones with him, he delays. And on that word, and he delayed, we have the Shalshelet. So you can actually hear his wavering. You can hear the dilly-dallying in the trope. And the Midrash tells us that Lot was attached to his possessions, to his money, to his cars, Cadillac, to his real estate, to his bank accounts. And he put money over life. And that's why he didn't want to leave. So they had to grab him and take him out. So in this case, the melody fits the content of the... The next time we have the Shalshelet in the Torah is in the great story of Abraham sending his servant Eliezer to choose a wife for his son Isaac. So Abraham gives Eliezer very minimal instructions. All he says to him is, don't choose a Canaanite woman. But other than that, no specifications. So here is Eliezer about to start a journey to find a lady for Isaac, and he has so many considerations that he has to weigh, which is what all of us weigh when we choose a life mate. What's more important? How wealthy is her family, her education, her beauty, her character? So eventually, we know the story. He chose character, chesed, and he devises a test that she has to pass. If he asks for water and she says, I'll draw water for you and for your camels, and she does that, that will be the lady he will choose. But at the beginning of his journey, when he's thinking about what test, that's where we have the word with a Shalshelet. Vayomar, which literally means, and he said. And he's saying it to himself. And then comes this test. So in the Vayomar, we can hear his internal deliberations. What is the most important factor? And it's not a simple question to answer. And so that Shalshelet captures that contemplation, that back and forth that goes inside of him until he finally settles on chesed. I want a lady who does chesed. So again, the melody fits the word perfectly. The third time we have a Shalshelet is in the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife. In a nutshell, Joseph is a servant in his house, and Potiphar's wife, who is described as a very beautiful, gorgeous woman, she takes a fancy to him, and she tries to seduce him, and he refuses, and we know the end. She falsely accused him of trying to rape her, and he gets thrown into the dungeon. But at the point where she comes up to him and he refuses, that's where we have the Shalshelet. Let's look at it. Vayima'en, which means he refused. And we can hear the temptation that he went through. The Shalshelet perhaps is showing us that it was hard for him to decide. He was very, very tempted. On the other hand, he eventually realized that it would be a sin, and that's what he tells her. Those are the next words. But the trope, again, fits the word perfectly. So in these three cases, we saw the Shalshelet is the sound of wavering, of deliberating. But how can we explain this week's instance of Shalshelet on the word Vayishchat? Shouldn't slaughtering be a quick, decisive action? Without any pain. So that makes no sense. So I'd like to share with you an explanation by Professor Menashe Eliashiv from Bar Ilan University. He says, if we look at the context, Moshe was doing these, so to speak, priestly actions, which from now on will be done only by the priest. Bringing sacrifices, sprinkling the blood, etc. So that's a lot of power. And this will be the last action that he will take. And he doesn't want to give up that power. And I'm not saying it in a negative way. I think he really felt that he can get close to God by doing these actions in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan. And so he's wavering before the action of slaughtering. He doesn't want to do it because he knows, if I do this, then the mantle goes over to Aaron and his sons, and I will never perform any more sacrifices or any chores in the Mishkan. And he finally decides he has to do it, and he has to give over the job to the Kohanim. So what does that teach us? I think here we can see the grain of the idea of separation of powers. Moshe understands you can't have too much power concentrated in one person. You can't be the prophet, the leader, and the high priest all together. As Lord Acton, a famous English lord, said, power corrupts And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we only have to look at our leaders to see that. And so we can learn from this Shalshelet here the importance of separation of powers. Now, you might say, what do you mean? He's giving it to his brother. We would call that today nepotism. But we have to understand, he didn't choose his brother. God told him, give this role to your brother. And so it's not that, Moshe said, oh, I'm going to appoint my brother to be the high priest. For all intents and purposes, had God said, give it to Joe Schmo from Dan or from Judah or from Benjamin, Moshe would have also done it. So back to the picture that I promised you. This is Montesquieu, the French philosopher who developed the theory of the importance of separation of powers in a democracy. We need to have the legislative branch, the executive branch, the judicial branch, all separate, all have the power to have checks and balances over each other. And that's the only thing that will guarantee our freedoms. So, in summary, we saw a pshat explanation that said it had nothing to do with the content of the word. It was just related to the syntax of the sentence. And then we had a drash explanation that showed that this trope is a sound of wavering. And we saw how we can even apply that to the word Vaishchat. So thanks for watching, and I wish you health and great Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.